All right, looks like we're diving into a mountain of material today. You trying to become like the ultimate explainer or something?
Well, it's a good skill to have, right? I mean, who couldn't use a little help explaining things more clearly?
Totally. And it seems like you've been digging into this book, The Art of Explanation. We've got some excerpts from it, ready to break it all down.
Yeah, and one thing that really stood out to me was how LeFever, the author, emphasizes this idea that you shouldn't just jump into the how without really nailing down the why first.
Okay, so before I tell you how to bake a cake, I got to convince you that cake is even worth baking in the first place, right?
Exactly. Like, so many times explanations just get lost in the weeds because the audience is never really on board with why they should even care. Think about it. Haven't you ever just totally zoned out when someone's explaining something and you're like, wait, why am I listening to this again?
Oh, all the time. Sometimes I realize halfway through that I have no clue why I'm supposed to be paying attention.
Right. And LeFever actually has this cool idea called the explanation scale.
Oh, yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, so it's like, imagine this scale from A to Z, where A is someone who knows absolutely nothing about the topic, and Z is the expert, right?
Makes sense.
And the point is, a good explanation doesn't try to, like, teleport people from A to Z in an instant.
More like building a staircase with each step being like a chunk of info they can actually handle.
Exactly. And this is where that curse of knowledge trap comes into play,
Huh.
which LeFever talks about quite a bit. He mentions this study where people were asked to tap out well-known songs, thinking that the listeners would be able to guess them really easily.
Wait, I think I've heard of this one. Weren't they totally wrong?
Oh, yeah, big time. Like, they thought people would get it like 50% of the time, but in reality, it was closer to 2%. The tappers were so focused on the tune in their own heads that they completely forgot what it was like to just hear a bunch of random taps.
So the lesson here is if I'm trying to explain something, I need to constantly be checking myself and asking, what does my audience actually already know? What can I build on?
Exactly. And that's where this idea of packaging comes in. LeFever compares it to gift wrapping.
Yeah.
Like, how you present an idea is just as important as the idea itself.
Not sure I totally get that. Isn't a good idea no matter how it's wrapped?
Well, think about it this way. If you tried to explain, say, cryptocurrency to someone who barely even uses email,
Oh, yeah. I see your point.
you're going to lose them pretty quickly.
Yeah.
You got to start with something they already agree with, like maybe the fact that sometimes banks make things super complicated.
Okay, so find that common ground, right? Like, hey, we both hate waiting in line at the bank, right?
Exactly. Build that connection, that trust. And then you got to bring in the context. Imagine trying to understand a conversation about, say, a sport you've never watched in your life. You'd be totally lost, right? You wouldn't know the rules, the
You'd
players.
need that background knowledge to even follow along.
Exactly. So I can't just launch into the technical details of, let's say, blockchain without first explaining why it's even relevant to them.
Right, so it's about answering that why should I care question before anything else. I see that.
And another really powerful tool that LeFever highlights is storytelling.
Ooh, yeah, stories are great.
He specifically mentions these Common Craft videos. I don't know if you've seen
Oh,
them.
yeah, I have. They're great at explaining things like wikis and cloud computing, and they use these really simple visuals.
Exactly. And they make those topics way less intimidating.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they use stories too, right?
they do. Like, for example, they explain wikis by telling this story about a group of friends who are planning a camping trip. And it's relatable. You know, everyone's been in that situation where you're trying to coordinate something.
Trying to keep track of who's bringing what and who's doing
Like,
what.
exactly. And
Yeah,
suddenly, the idea of a wiki as a solution just clicks, you know?
right. Because it's not just listing out features, it's showing you how this thing actually solves a real problem you might have.
And it makes it feel less like a lecture, right? More like you're discovering something genuinely useful.
Exactly. I like that. So it's not enough to just explain what something is. You also have to show how it fits into someone's life.
And LeFever also talks about using connections, which is basically just linking new information to things the audience already understands, like that famous pitch for the movie Alien, right?
In space, no one can hear you scream.
Well, yeah, but even before that tagline, they had this brilliant pitch. It's Jaws in space.
Oh, right. And instantly, I get it. I know exactly what kind of movie to expect.
It doesn't require any prior knowledge of Alien itself. They just tapped into something familiar and exciting: Jaws, a scary shark movie.
Clever. So it's like you're using existing knowledge as a bridge to the new stuff. I like that.
But what about when you do have to get into the details? Like once people get the WHY, how do you make the how W of something more digestible?
Right, because sometimes you can't avoid the nitty-gritty, can you?
Nope. And that's when you shift to what LeFever calls descriptions. Clear, concise explanations of how things actually work. But remember, you only do this after the audience is hooked on the why.
Okay, so first you get them excited about the destination, and then you give them the directions.
Precisely. It's all about the order, right? But what if the thing you're explaining is just really complex? How do you avoid totally overwhelming people?
Yeah, because sometimes it feels like there's just so much to explain, you know?
Yeah.
Where do you even start?
Well, that's where simplification comes in, big time.
Hmm.
And remember that curse of knowledge we were talking about?
Uh-huh.
It often leads experts to make things way, way more complicated than they need to be.
Oh, yeah, I've definitely been on the receiving end of those explanations where it's like they're speaking a completely different language.
Exactly. And LeFever really emphasizes this idea of breaking things down into their simplest core components. Like, if you're trying to explain virtualization to someone who's not a techie, you might say, it's basically a way to make your computer do more with less.
Okay, that makes way more sense than talking about virtual machines and all
Oh.
that.
It's like finding the essence of a really complex recipe. You might not be able to replicate the entire dish, but you at least get the basic flavors.
I like that analogy. So simplification isn't about dumbing things down. It's about finding that core truth that anyone can grasp regardless of their background.
Exactly. And then, to make things even clearer, LeFever is a huge believer in the power of visuals.
Of course, a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? Especially when you're dealing with something super abstract or technical.
Exactly. He talks about Dan Rome, who wrote this book called Blah, 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 What to Do When Words Don't Work.
Okay.
And Rome has this 6x6 rule for visual problem solving. Basically, he says you can represent any problem more clearly with a picture.
Interesting. So tell me more about this 6x6 rule. What's that all about?
Well, he identifies these 6 basic types of visuals: portraits, charts, maps, timelines, flowcharts, and multivariable plots. And using these can help you think through a problem and explain it much more clearly.
So it's like having different visual tools for different jobs. You choose the best one depending on what you're trying to explain. So like if I were pitching a business idea,
You could use portraits to visually represent your target customers. Instead of just describing them, you show them. Or you could use charts to show how your product is performing, or maps to illustrate your entire business model.
I see, I see. I'm starting to see how visuals can really add this whole other dimension to an explanation.
And Common Craft, LeFever's company, is amazing at this, right? They use really simple visuals and metaphors to explain even the most complex tech concepts.
Yeah, like that video where they depict the internet as this vast ocean of information, with
Go.
search engines being like ships that help you navigate. That one totally stuck with me.
Right. It's so effective. They keep things clean and uncluttered, so the focus is always on the idea, not on fancy artwork.
So it's not about being a graphic design whiz, it's about choosing the right visual to support your explanation.
Exactly. And speaking of choices, LeFever also emphasizes this idea of choosing the right medium for your explanation. Like you wouldn't explain something the same way to a room full of executives as you would to your friends, right?
Of course not. Totally different context.
Right. He talks about considering both media constraints, like the tools and resources you have available, and audience constraints, their needs, their preferences, and the specific situation.
So you're tailoring your approach based on who you're talking to and what you have to work with.
Exactly. Like if you're trying to explain something to, say, your grandma.
You're probably not going to send her a 20-slide PowerPoint deck.
Exactly. You might choose a face-to-face conversation, maybe with some printed visuals she can hold. But for a tech-savvy audience, a video or an interactive website might be way more effective.
So it's all about meeting your audience where they are. Got it. But with all this talk about clarity and simplicity, do we risk making things too basic? How do we make sure our explanations are still interesting and memorable?
Well, that's where making it remarkable comes in. It's about grabbing attention, sticking in people's minds, and inspiring them to want to learn more.
So it's not enough to just be clear you want to be engaging, maybe even entertaining, if you can swing it.
Exactly. LeFever shares some great tips from his experience at Common Craft, like using humor.
Oh, I love a good dose of humor. It can make even the driest topics more palatable.
Right. And he also talks about embracing imperfection, keeping things concise, and using unexpected analogies to spark curiosity.
So it's about finding that sweet spot between clarity and engagement. But how do you actually put all of this into practice? Like, how do you know when you've got an explanation problem in the first place?
He uses this great example of a communications consultant named Carlos, who helped a company revamp their explanation of a new healthcare plan they were rolling out.
Ooh, that sounds juicy. So, what was wrong with the original explanation?
Well, the employees were just totally confused and skeptical. They weren't signing up for the plan because they didn't understand how it worked
Hmm.
or why they should even care.
So, it was a classic explanation problem. The information wasn't getting through, and it was preventing people from taking action.
Exactly. And Carlos realized that the HR team was suffering from a major case of the curse of knowledge. They were so deep in the weeds of the policy details that they couldn't see it from the employee's perspective at all.
It's like that saying, you can't see the forest for the trees. They were so focused on the individual trees, the policy details, that they lost sight of the big picture.
Exactly. And to make things worse, they were using all this jargon and technical terms that just went right over people's heads.
It's like they were speaking a different language. No wonder the employees were confused. So, how did Carlos help them fix it?
Well, he started by introducing them to the explanation scale and having them imagine their employees at the very beginning, the A end of the scale, knowing nothing about the new plan.
Okay, so he was helping them understand their audience's starting point. Makes sense. But how do you actually move people along that scale? Like, what were the stepping stones he recommended?
He reminded them about starting with agreement, finding that common ground to build trust. And he emphasized the importance of focusing on the why. Why was the company making this change? What were the potential benefits for the employees?
So instead of just throwing policy details at them, they needed to answer that crucial "why should I care"
Mm.
question. But how did they actually do that? Did they send out a memo?
Well, to make those benefits more tangible, more relatable, Carlos had them create a story.
A story. Ooh, I like where this is going.
Yeah, and it's centered around two hypothetical families.
Wait, hold on. Are we going to hear about these families in part two? Because I got to know what happens.
We are. But before we get there, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. Is there anything you're still wondering about from this first part? Anything we need to circle back on?
Yeah, actually, LeFever keeps mentioning this explanation culture idea, and I'm not totally sure I get it. Can you unpack that a bit more before we move on? What does an explanation culture actually look like in practice?
Yeah, for sure. It's easy to kind of skim over those terms sometimes, even when they're important. An explanation culture is really all about making clear communication a priority, like throughout the workplace. It's not just about individuals being good explainers, but having it kind of woven into the fabric of how the whole organization operates.
So it's like instead of just assuming everyone's on the same page, people are constantly checking in, asking why, and making sure that everyone genuinely understands.
Exactly. LeFever actually tells this story about a woman, Naima, who starts applying these explanation principles at her tech company. And her colleagues are so impressed, she ends up leading these workshops. And slowly, that focus on clear communication just starts to kind of ripple out through the whole company.
It's like one person can spark a movement. That's pretty cool. But before we get too far off track, you were about to tell me about Carlos and those two families and how he used them to explain the healthcare plan.
Right. So he had the HR team create this narrative, like a mini story about these two families, Family A and Family B. They both had kind of similar needs, but they had totally different healthcare usage patterns. Like one family rarely ever went to the doctor, while the other one had tons of medical expenses.
Oh, I see where this is going. By showing how the plan actually affected these real, relatable families, they could make the benefits feel so much more real to the employees.
Exactly. It's about putting a human face on the policy
Hmm.
instead of just talking about it in these abstract terms. And they also started incorporating visuals like simple charts and timelines to break down the different options.
So it's like they took this boring old document and transformed it into something much more engaging, much more understandable. Did it work?
Oh, yeah. It was a huge success. Employee engagement with the plan just skyrocketed, confusion plummeted, and the company actually ended up hitting its enrollment goals.
Wow, that's a pretty powerful example of how the right explanation can actually change people's behavior. It's not just about sharing knowledge, it's about actually empowering people to make informed decisions.
Absolutely. And it shows that these principles can work in all sorts of situations, not just for explaining tech stuff.
Okay, so I'm starting to see the bigger picture here. But before we get too far away from LeFever's book, I think it would be good to recap some key takeaways for our listener. Like, what are the must-remember points from everything we've discussed so far?
Okay, so first off, remember that explanation is this active process. You're not just dumping information on someone, you're actually guiding them towards understanding. Think of it like you're a Sherpa leading them up a mountain, not just pointing at the summit from afar.
Oh, I love that analogy. So I need to be mindful of my audience's perspective, right? Meeting them where they are and building up their knowledge kind of step by step.
Exactly. And never forget about that curse of knowledge. We always assume people know more than they do, even about the most basic things.
It's so easy to forget what it's like to be a beginner, so I need to constantly be checking myself, asking, what might my audience not know about this?
Totally. And remember, those key elements for crafting great explanations, agreement, context, story, connections, and descriptions. Think of them as your explanation toolkit.
Got it. But I'm also realizing that sometimes less is more. Like, sometimes simplifying a complex idea down to its absolute essence can be way more effective than trying to explain every single little detail.
Absolutely. Don't be afraid to strip away all the jargon and just find that core concept that anyone can grasp. And of course, when it helps, never underestimate the power of a good visual.
Visuals can really make things so much clearer. Like that long tail example from the book, seeing a graph of that statistical concept just makes it click in a way that words alone never could.
Totally. Visuals are powerful. And then lastly, don't forget to choose the right medium for your explanation. Think about what's going to be the most effective for your audience and for the particular situation.
A face-to-face chat, a video, a well-crafted email. It all depends on the context, right?
Absolutely. There's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Okay, I think those are some really solid takeaways. But what about you? Were there any specific examples or stories from the book that really stood out to you that you found particularly memorable?
Hmm. Well, I thought that story about Deepika, the marketing manager who totally bombed her presentation,
Hmm.
was a great reminder that even really smart people can get lost in the
Oh,
weeds.
yeah, her.
Oh,
She was so focused on impressing the CMO with all her knowledge that she completely forgot to actually connect with her colleagues.
it just shows that even if you understand something perfectly, it doesn't mean you're explaining it in a way that others can actually grasp.
Right. Ouch. What about that runner with knee pain, Trevor? I think his name was Trevor. His coach was able to help him by explaining WHY good running form matters, not just telling him what to do.
Yeah, that's a perfect example of how understanding the why can be so much more effective than just focusing on the how. It leads to deeper learning and more sustainable results.
And of course, there's Common Craft. They're just masters of using simple stories and visuals to make even the most complex tech concepts understandable.
Totally. They're proof that you can explain really tough stuff without being dry or boring.
Their videos are just so charming and engaging.
Yeah.
I also love that anecdote about the naturalist Louis Agassiz, who would make his students just stare at a dead fish for days.
Look at your fish.
Right. It's such a powerful metaphor for the importance of really close observation. The more you look, the more you see, and the more you understand.
And that applies to explanation too, right?
Yeah.
The more closely we observe our audience, our message, the context of the conversation, all of that, the better our explanations are going to be.
It's about really seeing our audience, not just talking at them.
Hmm.
But beyond those specific examples, were there any kind of more nuanced ideas that really got you thinking? Any aha moments?
Yeah, actually, there were a few. LeFever talks about this distinction between rules and principles in storytelling, and I think it applies to explaining anything, really.
Oh, right. He quotes Robert McKee, the screenwriting guru, who says, "A rule says you must do it this way. A principle says this works and has through all remembered time."
Exactly. It's about understanding the WHY behind a technique, not just blindly following a formula. Once you grasp the underlying principles, you can adapt them to any situation.
So instead of trying to memorize a bunch of rules, I need to really figure out what the core principles are that make an explanation work, and then I can get creative and apply them in different ways.
Exactly. It's like learning to improvise on a musical instrument. Once you know the basic scales and chords,
Hmm.
you can create your own melodies. And another thing that really stuck with me was his discussion of noise and simplicity in visual communication.
Oh, yeah. He talked about how Common Craft keeps their visuals super clean and uncluttered, right? Like their characters don't even have any facial features.
Exactly. They strip away any detail that might distract from the main message. It's a good reminder for all of us to be mindful of the noise in our explanations, whether it's visual clutter, unnecessary jargon, or going off on these irrelevant tangents.
Right. It's about getting to the heart of the matter without overwhelming the audience with all this extra stuff. Less is more.
Totally. And remember that analogy he made between explanations and recipes.
Yeah, he said a recipe tells you how W to do something, but an explanation tells you how WAKY.
Exactly. It's a subtle distinction, but it's super important. Understanding the WHY gives your explanation this depth and meaning. Like if I give you a recipe for chocolate chip cookies, you can follow the steps and you'll bake some cookies, right?
Yeah.
But if I also explain WHY certain ingredients or techniques are important, you'll understand the whole process on this totally different level.
You'll be like an empowered baker. You'll know how to actually adjust the recipe based on your own preferences or what you have on hand.
Exactly. And that deeper understanding, that why, is what makes an explanation truly stick with people.
It's what transforms information into actual knowledge. Wow, this has been a really fascinating exploration of LeFever's ideas. But you know what I'm really curious about now? We've been talking about explaining things to other people, but what about explaining things to ourselves?
Oh, I like where you're going with this.
Do you think that thinking about this art of explanation could actually help us understand our own ideas better? Maybe even unlock new possibilities in our own lives? It's like that saying, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Could becoming a master explainer actually make you like a clearer thinker overall?
It's totally possible. I mean, think about it. When you actually force yourself to explain something clearly, you're kind of putting your own understanding to the test.
Right.
And if you find yourself getting all tripped up, it might be a sign that you need to go back and revisit your own assumptions.
So it's like holding up a mirror to your own thought process. And maybe that act of explaining, even just to yourself, can help you solidify those ideas, make them more concrete in your own mind.
Yeah, for sure. It can help you identify gaps in your knowledge, you know, maybe help you make new connections, or even spark some totally new creative insights. LeFever even suggests that explanation can actually make you a better problem solver.
Really?
He said that by like breaking a problem down into smaller parts and then explaining each part really clearly, you might uncover solutions that you wouldn't have seen otherwise.
So you're kind of deconstructing the problem, right?
Yeah.
Understanding its root causes and then using that understanding to build a better solution. So the act of explaining, whether it's to someone else or even just to myself, could actually help me become a more effective thinker, more effective problem solver. That's pretty cool.
It's a powerful tool. And you know what else? LeFever also talks about how explaining your passions to other people can really strengthen your relationships.
Yeah.
You can create this sense of shared purpose.
I can totally see that. Like if I can clearly explain why I'm so excited about some project I'm working on, it might inspire other people to get on board too.
Exactly. Explanation can be this bridge, not just between minds, but also between hearts. It's a way to share your enthusiasm, your knowledge, your values with the people around you.
Well, this has been a truly eye-opening deep dive. Who knew that explaining things could be such a profound, multifaceted skill?
Yeah, it really is. It's more than just conveying information. It's about fostering understanding,
Yeah.
building those connections, and sometimes even inspiring action.
Beautifully put. And it sounds like you've given a lot of thought to these ideas yourself. What are some practices, maybe some daily habits that you think can help someone develop that explanation muscle, so to speak?
Well, one of the simplest things, but also one of the most effective, is to just become more aware of explanations in your everyday life. Like, start paying attention to how other people explain things, both the good and the bad.
So become a student of explanation, right? Observe the world through that lens, and maybe even take some notes about what makes certain explanations really stand out.
Exactly. You can even turn those everyday conversations into little practice opportunities. When someone asks you a question, challenge yourself to answer it in a way that's clear, concise, and engaging.
So you're turning those small moments into these mini explanation workouts. You're building up
Mm.
that mental agility. But what if you're not sure how you're doing? Is there a way to get feedback on your explanations to know if you're actually improving?
Absolutely. Ask a friend or a family member or a colleague for some honest feedback. Just tell them, hey, I'm really working on explaining things better. What do you notice?
So it's like having a trusted explanation coach in your corner, helping you refine your technique.
Exactly.
And once you get that feedback, don't be afraid to experiment a little bit.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Try different approaches, play around with different mediums, see what resonates best with your audience. It's all about embracing that spirit of curiosity and continuous improvement.
Totally agree.
It's not about becoming a perfect explainer overnight. It's about just making a conscious effort to get better over time, to learn from our experiences and learn from others.
Yeah, I think that's key. And, one final piece of advice I'd give, don't be afraid to be yourself.
Oh, good one.
Let your own personality shine through in your explanations. Authenticity is huge.
Because when you genuinely care about what you're explaining, I think that passion becomes contagious. People can really feel that energy.
Absolutely. People are drawn to that genuine enthusiasm, that excitement. So don't be afraid to geek out a little.
Well, I think this deep dive has given us a ton to think about. We've covered everything from the curse of knowledge to the power of storytelling, the importance of visuals, the subtle art of choosing the right medium. It's clear that explanation is a really complex and a really valuable skill.
It's a skill that can truly make a difference, I think. It helps us connect with other people, it helps us solve problems, and it helps us bring our ideas to life.
So well said. And I hope our listeners are walking away from this feeling inspired, feeling excited about the power of explanation. It's not just something we do, it's a way of thinking. It's a way of engaging with the world, and it's a way of sharing our knowledge and our passions with the people around us.
So go forth and explain.
Happy explaining, everyone!